welcome back to the What the Falk preview show. The international break is done and dusted, and Sunderland will get the chance to solidify their place at the top of the table as they visit Hull City for a 3 p.m. Saturday afternoon kickoff, which is always nice to see.
Sunday afternoon.
Is it yesterday? That's what I meant. I can edit. It's fine. It's been a little while since the sides last faced each other, and whilst we have new men in the dugout, both of us, we've decided to stay with the tried and trusted method on the preview show. You've heard his voice already, but welcome back, Anthem, to Hull and Back podcast. How are you doing, Ant? You okay, mate?
Yeah, I'm fine, mate. Thanks. How are you?
Just pleased I remember the game was on a Sunday.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
That's such bad form. But you know what? I'm not going to edit it. No, I'm keeping it in just to show that I am not perfect. I'm not perfect. None of us are, and none of us should be. Plenty to get dug into. As I said in the start, like different managers, X, Y, and Z. But as we always do, we'll start from the top. Prior to England getting sort of smashed by Greece at Wembley, Hull faced Norwich, and you came out the other end of a 4-0 defeat. I'm sure you'd rather forget about it completely, and you might have done a little bit, but I'm going to drag you back a bit. How was the performance? Why did you lose so heavily?
It's actually a weird one with us at the minute. So, yeah, it was 4-0, but we could have quite easily scored 4 or 5 ourselves. It was just, for us being wasteful at the top. We knew that, we'd won the three games before that in a row. So, obviously, we beat Stoke, QPR and Cardiff. Before that, so got the 3 wins out of 3. And I think what the problem is we know that with this style, that we knew what we was going to get with this manager. He's heralded as heart attack football. It's a very bizarre style of play. You'll see this yourself when you watch the game. You won't know where our players are playing or who's meant to be in what position because we're just all over the place. And it is all out attack, really high pressing intensity. He wants our back four camped on the halfway line. He's got centre backs in the number 10 positions, that kind of thing. And it's all well and good when you're coming up against teams like Cardiff that aren't too brilliant with their finishing. But when you come up against a team like Norwich, who have got very good attacking players and haven't lost at home for over a year, that style left us really exposed, and Norwich just sort of picked them holes and took their chances. So we knew full well that if we came up against a side that had, a bit more ruthlessness about them up top, that we would probably come unstuck and it would be a problem. But he will not change his style of play no matter who we play. So the fact that we've got Sunderland and Burnley as our next two is quite a worrying prospect because it's two good teams that are doing really well at the minute and probably would score most of the chances that you are gifted when you play against us, because we will give you chances in a game. It's just a case of our style now is we're going to score more goals than you. Didn't do very well with that against Norwich, obviously, was on the back of a 4-0 defeat. But we had scored 10 in the previous 3 before that. We're just going to aim at being so attacking that we'll score 3, even if we concede 2. That's just the aim he's going for. It's definitely entertaining. It's a lot more entertaining than it was last season. Whether it's sustainable long term, we don't know. But that Norwich game did sort of reflect the kind of issues with this style of player that we have, and maybe being a bit naive against the better teams. Maybe we need to solidify it, put a couple of defensive midfielders in there instead, but he won't do that. It'll be the same from every game now to the end of the season.
I did want to get into the new manager because he's quite interesting in the sense of his background. But before we do, I think we'll start at the top. Now, I've said this a few times. There's often you can be like, oh, that was a really surprising decision, but you never really know if it's surprising until you speak to a fan of the club. But I thought at the time, Rosenior being sacked in the summer felt like a bit of an odd one. He was obviously linked to Sunderland before we got him, which I personally was not against. I think he did a relatively decent job with Hull. But before we get on to that new man, what did you make at the time, I suppose, of the decision to replace Rosenior?
I think initially, the entire fan base, as well as obviously the rest of the footballing world, were pretty shocked initially, because obviously finishing 3 points outside the top 6, considering was fighting relegation the season before, was some season. But then when you also look at the standard of players that we had last year, should we have actually been in the top 6? Yes, probably. I think that the issue was that, we all love Rosenior, and we all did, and we all really wanted it to work out for him. But it's easy to forget that despite him having this massive respect in the game and loads of other clubs that look at him and maybe looked at us last season with a little bit of envy that we had him, he is very, very early into his managerial career. There's a lot of naivety there. There's a lot of stubbornness there. And I think that's what cost us last season. He's got this He's obviously decided to come into management with this ideology, way of playing. He wants to be slow, methodical, safe, possession-based. And it works for the most part. It's just that when you we've got shackles on some of your more attacking players, or his substitutions were a bit bizarre at times, team selections were a bit bizarre. We finished the season with 3 wins in our last 13. We beat Cardiff last week, and that a couple of weeks ago, sorry, and that was only our 3rd win in 2024 at home. So we're not doing very well at home at the minute, which will be music to Sunderland fans' ears, obviously. But the issue Ryan Alsop in goal was absolutely horrendous. His place in the team, because he was good with the ball at his feet. You might as well have just stuck an outfield player in goal if that was the method behind it, because he just cost us so many points with his mistakes. Things like that. Then signing players like Zarori and putting him in Philigine's position, who was doing absolutely amazing, and moving him out onto the right-hand side where he was a lot worse. There was just some really weird decisions, and the style of play wasn't the most entertaining. At home, we were dire. Away from home, we had it absolutely cracked. And this was the frustrating thing, is that away from home, I think we were 4th in the table for away form. Only behind, obviously, your Leeds, Ipswich, Leicester, teams like that. But at home, we were 13th. So if we'd have been slightly better at home, we'd have finished in the top 6. But this insistence on playing this slow, sideways style of play, it nulled the atmosphere. Teams knew how to play against us. If you just sat back and did a low block and just let us have the ball, we did nothing. There was no risk-taking. There was no probing. There was no changing the system and going in behind and that kind of things. It was just, it's my way and it will work eventually, or the plan A or plan A better is usually the term used for it. But yeah, it was a weird one, because you feel like if he'd have just tweaked a couple of things, we'd have been there. And I think most fans would have been happy to see him stay and have another maybe 6 months to just sort of prove that. But he was backed heavily. We had a lot of phenomenal players. I mean, nearly £200 million if you take in some of the transfers that we had in transfer. I mean, look at Liam Delap now in the Premier League, Jacob Graves, Jadon Philogene, Fabio Carvalho's just gone for 30 million at Brentford, Tyler Morton. We had some fantastic players, and ultimately we failed in what was meant to be a top 6 season. So we're kind of suffering the repercussions of that.
It's interesting you mentioned about the sitting back, because obviously we won at Hull on Boxing Day. We lost at home. That game at home was awful, but the away game, it just felt like, let's just let them have the ball and pass it about. And I think, I quite liked Rosenior. I can understand where you're coming from, but I only watched him in a couple of games. I thought he did all right. I was not against him being here. But I suppose when I really think about it, he was out-tacticked by Michael Beale. So
yeah, at home we were really poor. I mean, I said this once the news had sort of settled down a bit, and after a couple of weeks, I remember I go to the game with my uncles and a few of my family, and I remember turning to my uncle and saying, do you know what? When I think about it, I don't think I can. I'd only need one hand to count the amount of times I came away from a home game last season and thought I really enjoyed that, or played well. And the 2 most entertaining games came towards the end of the season when we drew 2-2 with Leicester and 3-3 with Ipswich, and neither of them ended up in wins. So it's one of them where he has the style of play, he's sticking to it, which is admirable. But for me, the best managers have to be adaptable. You have to have variation. You've got to have that bit of tactical depth here. If you're coming up against a team that's going to exploit weaknesses, if you come up against a team that's going to nullify whatever you've got to find new ways of winning. And Rosenior didn't do that. It was a case of, moments of individual quality, especially from players like Philogene, would win us games rather than the system itself. So, yeah, it was a weird one, but from within the fan base, I think it's still pretty fractured as well. There's a lot of people who think we should have kept him. There's a lot of people. I mean, there's a lot of hearsay at the minute. Obviously, with bad results, it's like, oh look, we should have kept Rosenior, as you get with teams and whatever. But no, I'd have happily given him another 6 months, but I can also understand why he hasn't.
So the new guy, totally different. I haven't watched a great deal of it, but from what I have seen, kind of reflective of what you've seen before. It does seem my way or the highway. In some way, the Ange Postecoglou way, if you know what I mean, which Spurs fans might say works. Some Spurs fans might say it doesn't work. What do you feel about Walter, shall we say? It's Tim Walter, isn't it? It's not Walter.
Yeah, it's Tim Walter. Yeah, no, he's certainly a character. I really like it. On the touchline, he's just arms everywhere. He's very animated. If a player makes a mistake, they know about it. He will let them know immediately. I would hate to be in a lot of the dressing rooms for halftime at this season, because we've been really we have this tendency to start games really poorly and then come out in the second half better. So I imagine at half time he probably fist fights all of them or something. But no, as a coach, I mean, it's another case of we've got one style of play and that we're going to stick to it throughout the 90 minutes. But I think obviously with the logic behind the Rosenior sacking was the owner wants entertainment factor. He wants the fans to be able to come to games, and he'd much rather us lose 4-3 than watch a 0-0 draw, which obviously points wise doesn't make sense. But I think he means over the course of a season, if you're playing that way, game by game, you're going to score more in other games and win kind of thing. So it's a win-loss rather than 2 draws kind of thing. And we're certainly going to get that with Ortega. We've heard from other fans of teams that he's managed, is just chaotically attacking, play out from the back, risk taking. The goalkeeper essentially becomes an outfield player, like where normally teams would use you. So, say for example, Sunderland, Dan Neil would be your pivot between the defence and attack. We don't do that. Our midfield are largely anonymous. We don't really use them. We use our goalkeeper as the pivot. He comes out, and we play triangles with him. It's absolutely crazy, but it's chaotic. It is genuine heart attack football. It is entertaining. There is one thing that you can guarantee with our style of play is we will give you chances, whether that be from sloppy passing, from you guys stealing the ball in the half and then going on the counter. We leave a lot of spaces. There's a lot of new players in this team that are still, figuring each other out, forming those partnerships. There's still a lot of players trying to learn the system, which is obviously a really difficult system to learn. So at the minute, we're in a bit of a transition period, and you can tell. So there are going to be games where we absolutely mauler people 4-5-0. There will be games where we lose 4 or 5-0. That's just kind of the standard we're at the minute. There's going to be no 0-0s, I don't think, in this team. I don't think we'll probably see over 5 clean sheets this season. In saying that, I mean, you've got to admire it. He's trying to bring this. I mean, so many managers after games have said the same comments when we played them, as they admire the way that he's trying to bring this entire new style of play that's probably never been seen in this country. I mean, Postecoglou plays a really high line, but it's organised in the sense of players stick to their positions and it's fluid. Whereas with us, it is, one moment our centre-back's got the ball, he'll pass it on, and then he will pop up in the opposition's box, and it's not a corner. So, it's these players are just everywhere. There's moving pieces constantly. Like Chris Wilder said when Sheffield United beat us 2-0, he knew that we were going to give us, I think his quote was, we knew they were going to give us chances, but we just didn't think they were going to give us as many as they did. They came away with a 2-0 win. 2 of our own corners ended up in the back of our own net. We have a very insistent short corner routine that frustrates some fans, but we've actually got a couple of goals from them now, so some are arguing in favour. We are we're an anomaly, I think is the best way to describe us in the league this season. I'm really interested to see, because I think as the season goes on, I think we'll get better. I think as the players start to understand and, like we say, play more time together, train more together and form those partnerships and get that sort of psychic understanding as to where they're meant to be in things, I think we will progressively get better. It's just getting through, I think, until January in this little transition period. But I'm excited. Is it sustainable long term? Probably not. Would we get absolutely hammered in the Premier League if we went up under him? I imagine so. But listen, it'll be fun. And after last season and what we watched at home, I'm all for a bit of fun.
I think there's a little side story as well towards like this weekend. We've switched forwards. You picked up Mason Burstow from Chelsea, whilst we took Aaron Connolly after his release from yourselves. Before we get into it, because I'm interested in the Burstow thing, and I know Sunderland fans will be, I think. I'm sure you'll have seen Aaron's video on World Mental Health Day. Now, before he came to Sunderland, without people knowing that, there was a suggestion that his attitude hadn't been perfect. A lot of stuff makes a lot more sense now in terms of why he's maybe struggled over the past couple of years. But what did you make of his video, his explanation, stuff like that? Did that kind of sum up his time? Not sum up his time, did it explain his struggles at whole a little bit more?
I think it gave a bit of much needed backstory, because I think a lot of fans, I think us as fans, it's a very emotional sport. Mm-hmm. And I think obviously if we'd have had a fit Aaron Connolly for the last 6 months of the season, we might have made the top 6. Because listen, there is an absolute player there. He's a phenomenal player on his day. But like we're saying, and this was consistent with what Brighton fans and Middlesbrough fans told us when he signed for us is it's just keeping him focused, keeping him grounded and keeping him motivated. That's the problem, which is why we only gave him a 1 year deal. We initially had him on 6 month loan and then we signed him for a year. And then obviously we chose not to renew it. But if he can get himself sorted and get the kind of help that he needs, which, I mean, to be fair, that video was super brave, and I'm really happy that he's done that, because I feel like a lot of City fans that maybe had a bit of resentment towards him might now see it in a different light. So I think it was really important, and for someone to come out and admit that they've got issues, and it is always brave on my account. So yeah, it was a fantastic video and really well done. But yeah, I'm a little bit annoyed because I would have happily had Connolly back again this season, especially when we missed out on the striker that we had. I mean, he scored 8 goals for us last season, and he missed, like, I would say, nearly a half of the season because of injury. I mean, he is always injured. That is a problem with Connolly as well. He's keeping him fit. But he's a goal scorer. He is. If you can get him in the system and get him working, he will score your goals at this level. And I think he's a really good player. So yeah, it's kind of written in the stars, isn't it, for Aaron Connolly, 89th minute winner, I think, off the bench for Sunderland. No, I hope he sorts himself out and gets a good career.
I think with Connolly, I can't claim to know much about him, but it got to the end of the window, and we've got Mayenda, who's actually done quite well, but he's picked up a knock recently, and Wilson Isidore's came in, scored a couple of goals, and looked really good. I don't think there was any harm in bringing in an extra striker. Did I think it would be Aaron Connolly? No, mainly because I felt, well, if Hull have released him, there's probably not going to be likelihood that Sunderland are going to be interested in him at the moment, because it seems that, you know, Hull, who won promotion as well, or did last year, decided not to keep him on board. But then when he did make the move, and even before the video, there was quite a few Hull fans that, you know, had been quite complimentary of him, with everything you said before about the caveats. But he said himself in that video that he felt like he felt he was hurting people off the pitch with alcoholism and things like that. But he actually felt it was one of his best seasons he'd ever had at Hull. Last year, I think he scored 8 goals. I've never really seen the kid play. I'm not going to lie to you. I watched him a bit in the under-21s, but what do you make from that? If Connolly plays to his abilities, what have we got?
He's a wind-up merchant. So he's for what you guys love, lowdown. Yeah, Aaron Connolly is one at the other end of the pitch. So he is a constant thorn in the defender's backside. He wants to run in behind. I think that's the kind of style that we missed at points last season when teams sat back. We needed somebody to run off the shoulder. That's what he does. I think if you look at the highlights of Blackburn away that we played last season, and he came off the bench and scored 2 goals to win us the game, that's the kind of striker he is. He's constantly on the shoulder. He's constantly asking questions of the back four. He wins you a lot of fouls. I mean, they won't all be fouls, but he will win you them. And he does wind up players. I think he's a bit mouthy, to be fair, on the pitch. I think that's what winds people up. So he is the kind of player that you hate to play against, but you would love to have in your team. And like I say, he's a goal scorer. He's a good finisher. If he's in and around the box, he's scoring a goal. If it drops to him, it's just obviously getting the ball to him in that position, because I don't think his link-up play is the best. But like you say, in terms of being sort of the in-behind striker and constantly having defenders look over the shoulder and take attention from other players, he's great at that. He can even come in off, I think when we had him on loan the season before for 6 months, he actually played as like a left winger and cut in on his right, and he was pretty good at that as well. So he is versatile. I think that's what he came through at Brighton as, actually, was a winger and sort of converted to a striker. But no, he's especially off the bench, he's a phenomenal player to bring on to change the game if you need something different.
One player who I wish I could tell you is phenomenal, but wasn't at Sunderland is Mason Burstow. He scored you played a mid-season friendly against a Turkish team I can't pronounce, but he scored. But look, there'll be Sunderland fans listening to this, and you'll have seen the comment when you signed him. I know it was flooded with Sunderland fans. Mason Burstow could go on to be a great footballer. There's obviously some sort of talent there somewhere, because he wouldn't have been picked up by Chelsea. At Sunderland, in the season he was up there with the worst I've ever seen in my life. I don't think he scored for you yet in the league. I don't think he's played predominantly he hasn't started every game. But look, no one wants to see anyone massively fail. How was he done with Hull? What's his first impressions been? Because it was a torrid time for him in Sunderland. He was awful.
Yeah, so we kind of changed our transfer policy, because for the last few years, since obviously the takeovers happened, we've kind of just done a complete upheaval every year. And I think when you're looking for sustainability, sort of getting rid of 10 to 15 players and bringing in 10 to 15 new every season isn't going to work. So we've kind of changed up our transfer policy and looked at young players that have got potential that we can have for a few years that, you know, will get better, hopefully, and increase in value, either whether that be with the contributions on the pitch or if another team ends up coming in and picking them off for what we paid, for more than what we paid. That's just the way we've gone. And Burstow was one of those that, I mean, because our owner, he's very Sherman. He likes to be in the press. He loves that. He's always somewhere. And he was saying about we're going to sign a striker that would like change the DNA of the championship, i.e., like a Philogene signing that we had last season that shouldn't be coming to Hull City but did. And as the window got on and on and on, it never really appeared. Nothing was coming in, and then the striker we signed was Mason Burstow, and people were like, surely this isn't the guy he's on about. It wasn't, but we brought him in as a long-term option. He's not come in really to make any impact this season, I don't think. He did have to play a little bit at the beginning when we first brought him in, but that was because we did our transfer business so late in the window that we didn't have any strikers. The only striker we had was Oscar Estepinian, and then he's good at scoring goals, but in terms of like link up play and hold up, he's not very good at that. So we needed somebody else that could do that. And Burstow is a big physical striker that can do that. So I think it's a case of we're hoping over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, because we've obviously brought him in permanently, that he will get better. He's currently third choice. He will be behind. We've just brought in João Pedro on a free as well, not the Watford or Brighton one. It's a different Italian João Pedro. We brought him in, and obviously Chris Beddier, who scored 2 as well. It's going to be between them 2 for the top spot. But Burstow will be nomadic, sporadic appearances. Maybe when the FA Cup comes back around, he'll be playing in that kind of thing. But from what I've seen of him, he looks okay. He doesn't look like a 15 to 20 goal striker, but he looks like he will contribute in terms of bringing other players into the game. I think with the kind of wingers that we play, like Liam Miller and then Mohamed Baloumi on the other side, with the whole inside forward kind of thing that teams do nowadays, to have somebody like him that can hold the ball up lets them then go in behind and create chances. So I think it was a signing we looked at initially. Obviously, only scored 2. I think, was it last season? And you think, God, was it 1? In terms of goal scoring problems that we've got at the minute, because we lost all of our goal scorers in the summer, he's not really the answer. But in terms, when you look at the transfer, sort of when you take your amber and black tinted specs off, it's a long-term investment that we hope gets better as time goes on. And I'm expecting come January he'll probably get a loan spell. If he's not going to play, I'd like to see him go on loan. But he's definitely one that will contribute sporadically this season. He's not our main guy.
Maybe Sunderland fans like screaming just now, being like, "He's rubbish! No, get rid." But to be fair to him,
but you see, the thing is we've heard that from a lot of players. Liam Delap had 2 failed loan spells at Stoke and Preston in the same season. We signed him last season, and they were like, "He's absolutely horrendous, one of the worst strikers we've ever had," and he was phenomenal. And now look at him; he's lighting up the Premier League. Sometimes it just takes one club, one system, one manager just to sort of reignite or just find that role. I mean, Sunderland last season weren't the most stable. Like, what was it, 3 or 4 managers you had last season? So it's not easy for a young player to come in and lead a line when you've got a constant changing manager. And I think all of the Sunderland strikers struggled last season. It wasn't just Burstow. I think in terms of goals, you went lighting up any goal scoring charts, was you? So it is tough. I mean, people take perspective out of the equation sometimes, as you do as a football fan. And maybe you were being a bit harsh on him as a fan base, but yeah, I think he'd probably love to come on off the bench and score against Sunderland. I'm kind of hoping we do put him on the bench. If you bring Connolly on, we're bringing Burstow on, and let's see who scores first, kind of thing.
I agree. I think look, with Burstow, like I think I'm not going to rewrite history. I thought he was awful, but he is a kid, and it was a chaotic season that had a lot of errors that are now looking like they're being fixed, thankfully, but. There was caveats towards it, and I think with him being young, maybe less pressure, being a hallway, doesn't need to be the first choice striker. That could work out, but I can still hear the Sunderland fans screaming in the back of my ear here. Yes. It was a funny summer for you in many ways, because you went from being 7th, not too far at the playoffs, you changed your manager, and then you lost Philogene, which I think probably was expected because of what he produced last season. But Jacob Greaves went, Tufan went, you touched on Estupinan, I think I pronounced it correctly, all departed. There was money that came in, and I think from the outside looking in, Hull became that team where some Sunderland fans felt we should have spent a bit more money in January and had a bit of a go at promotion last season and ended up not doing that. And there's a lot of people that went, we should have done what Hull are doing. Look, Hull are going for it. And then when it came to the summer, everyone's going, oh, well, look, Hull are now having to like sell some players. So this is why we shouldn't have done it. How much did the spend that you had last year affect you in terms of like moving forward this season? Because it seems like you've leveled out a little bit, but at one point it looked a bit hairy. I'm not going to lie, from the outside looking in.
I think we were realistically always okay. Imagine like a very overexcitable child as a chairman. He wants the Premier League and he's like, right, let's just bring in all these superstar players and it'll work kind of thing. And he needs sort of honing in on a leash kind of thing. But last season, I think what happened was we probably planned on like a mid-table kind of season. You probably, if we listened to our talk early on in the season, I'd probably be saying mid-table. And Rosenior got us to a point where we were actually inside the top 6 come January. And I think what's happened is because they gave him a new contract in December, which is some of the more bizarre reasons as to why he was sacked 6 months later. But they gave him a new contract in December. But I think the talks for that went on for a couple of months. So I think what had happened was they were pleased with what was happening in terms of results and where we were. But they were asking him to change the style of play and go a bit more front foot, a bit more attacking because they could sense the fans were getting a bit miffed at home and things like that. And I think what Rosenior's this is just me speculating. This isn't by no way confirmed. But what I think's happened is Rosenior's turned around and said, I can't play that style because I don't have the players for it. Because we did have a thin squad and a lot of injuries at that point. I think when Sunderland beat us, we had a lot of injuries, and it was. I think Arjun's turned around and gone, right, who do you need? And they've come out and brought Ryan Giles, Anas Rory. We made loads of signings in January, and it was like worth 3 points inside the top 6 with a game in hand. We're in a really good position. We've signed some superstar players. Fabio Carvalho's come in. This is it. We're going to do it. And we actually got worse from January onwards. I mean, Delap getting a 6-month injury in January did not help at all. And I still think that we'd have been top 6 if he'd have played for 10 more games. But I think it was a case of we brought in a lot of players and he didn't quite know how to fit them all into the system correctly. I think a couple of players underperformed. So like Zarori didn't really make the impact we wanted him to. Giles didn't. There was always question marks, but he did always sort of alleviate those fears because he does Q&As quite regularly, our chairman. He reads this is something you should never ever do if you're involved in football, is read the Twitter timeline. He reads it consistently. He's regularly on it. So he saw that whenever he sees City fans are getting a bit sort of tetchy, he does a Q&A. So everyone can just ask him questions and he can just answer them as honest as he can, which is great. Absolutely great. But sometimes, like I say, excitable child, he says things wrong sometimes. But I think he's always said we were fine money-wise. We're really good at getting in sponsors and paid partners and commercial things. And the match day food sells really well because it's phenomenal. I think in terms of revenue and things like that, I think we're pretty fine. I think in terms of needing to trim the wage bill, that was probably a problem. But it's more or less we sold players because, and this is his own words, he wants us to be a club that players want to join as a stepping stone. So he said that he could have held out for more money for Greaves. He could have held out for more money for Philogene and just sort of dragged it out over the summer. But he doesn't want to sort of hinder their careers. So when we had sort of like, Greaves for me should have been 20 to 25 mil. They accepted, I think, 18. So he wasn't far off. There will be add-ons. Philogene went back to Villa because they had a buyback clause where they could match. If we accepted a bid, they got first dibs on that offer. So Ipswich offered 18. Villa accepted it, but they had a sell-on clause, so it knocks it down to 13. And I think it's a lot less than what you'd want for someone like Philogene. But then when you look at it, like we basically had him on loan for a season and they paid us 13 million to do so, it sounds a bit better. He came from Villa. But no, yeah, we always knew we was going to lose Greaves and Philogene. I think the Tufan one was a surprise, but he'd been on massive wages. Estepinian made sense because he doesn't really suit the system. He'd have been on big wages. Some of the players that we released, like Doherty and players like that, were always really good servants, but were not realistically good enough to get to where we wanted to be. And then obviously all the loan players had to go back to their parent clubs, Delap, Carvalho, Zarori, players like that. But I think money-wise, we were probably really close. I think we made a 10 to 15 million pound profit this summer. I think we've ended up spending nearly just over 20, and we brought in nearly just over 30 or something like that. So we've done all right. And I think we've changed our transfer policy and gone for young players. But you've got to be as an EFL club, and this is what Tan Kesler said from the off, really, that's frustrating about like the FFP rules and things like that, is that if you want to be an ambitious club, you have to spend money. You have to be ambitious in the sense of you go beyond the safety of this profit margin, because you can't compete with the parachute payments that, you know, these teams that are coming down from the Premier League that have got, you know, £2.5 million wage bills or something like that. We're not in the same bracket. And you can see that when promoted teams go up, they struggle to stay up. We've got owners that are always going to push that boundary. I think that's just where we are. We're always going to try and spend what we can. If there's money there to spend, he will spend it. But I think he's got enough grounded personnel around him that we know full well where we're sitting, and we rectify every transfer before it goes through, so we're not breaking rules and things like that.
Touched on Sunderland a little bit earlier in the show, but like looking at Sunderland, look, it's a really nice time to be a Sunderland fan. We're top of the league, like brilliant. Fan David Dozy, like can't complain. But the last time we spoke, look, I said it before, it was potentially one of the worst games I've ever watched, and it was like the beginning of the end for Michael Beale, which, to be honest, was right at the start of his tenure anyway, to be honest. Then we fell apart and we finished 16th. But summer was a bit of a different beast. Got a manager in, sit top of the table. Look, things are looking really good. I know how good it feels from the inside, but from the outside looking in, what have you made of Sunderland start of the season? Is it a surprise that we're top, or do you think it's kind of not expected, but you know where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I think for me personally, it was a surprise that you're doing as well as you are. I mean, I felt like that it was always a case of Sunderland are always one of those teams you expect to be sort of in and around the top six. And last season, we all knew was going to be a massive disappointment for Sunderland as a club, and they shouldn't be probably down anywhere near 16 for the kind of players that they had. And then especially when you lost Clark, I thought that would be a massive stumbling block, because I thought they've got no goals in their team. Like Jack Clark last season really was the only source of goals that Sunderland had, and now he's gone. I don't quite see how they're going to score enough goals to be competing. But no, you've sort of, I think the new manager, obviously you've stumbled upon a gem. His style of play obviously works. I've watched a couple of games on Sky this season. I've been really impressed. I think the front line looks really fluid. I think the midfield looks solid, and the defence is really threatening, especially with the fullbacks bombing on and stuff. So yeah, no, I think Sunderland have been one of those surprise packages. I think everyone sort of scoffed, because I think Gabe Sutton actually predicted Sunderland to win the league.
Yeah, he did.
And a lot of people were like, that's madness. And then they're currently sat at the top of the league. So it's like, oh, was it really? But I still feel like Sunderland are one of those teams that might drop off. I think when it comes to like Burnley and Leeds and teams like that have got sort of that Premier League quality behind them, let's be honest, that over the long run, over the 46 games, they're going to have more on a consistent basis. But I do think Sunderland are nailed on for top six. And I think I am really worried, more so definitely than I was last season playing Sunderland. I'm really worried that we could be on the end of another absolute drubbing on the weekend. So yeah, I think Sunderland, because if you can beat us, I think it just piles that pressure on again. And people, it's similar to Ipswich, I really like last season, where they were like, oh, they're going to fall off, it'll be all right. And then, you know, look where they are. So I suppose if you can just ride that momentum and consistency, out can happen in this league.
Funny you touched about goal scorers. I thought the same when we lost Clark, but little did I know, Islan Meslier would be playing up front for us on occasional Friday nights. I know you're a big Dan Neil fan, and I know I asked this question last year, but I've changed it a little bit, as the listeners will know. If you could take one Sunderland player to fit into your starting 11, not necessarily our best player, just a player you think that would benefit, maybe where you're weakest, who would you take and why would you take him?
I'd probably say Dan Neil again, but I'm going to change it just for content purposes. I think I really like Sirkin. I really like Sirkin. I think because with us at the minute, our left-hand side, our left-back position has been a real issue for the last 2 or 3 years now. We signed Ryan Giles last season on loan. We thought, a phenomenal player at this level, 20-odd assists in 2 years he's had. Great player. Every championship club wanted him. Didn't really do anything under Rosenior, and I just thought maybe the system hindered him a bit, and that this new really attacking system where they're encouraged to get beyond the winger and really contribute would see the best of him, and he's actually been dropped. And we're playing a right back and left back over him that he's been playing that bad. So yeah, no, I look at other left backs that are productive and that go forward and really contribute, but are also pretty good defensively with a bit of envy. And from what I've seen of Sunderland on Sky, especially, I really like Sirkin. I think he would be absolutely perfect in our back four. I think Volta system would suit him a lot, but obviously he's thriving in the current Labrie system. So Yeah, no, I'd probably say Sirkin this time round.
Nobody will disagree with gorgeous Dennis. I love Dennis Sirkin. Predictions, as always. We've lost our last 2 away games, I think. Annoyingly lost them as well, like stupid mistakes. So I don't think we're going to lose 3 in a row. At the same time, I kind of fancy a draw, which is a bit negative for me, considering you've only won 1 game at home, the things you've said. But I just think a draw. So I'm going to go 2-2.
That makes sense. A lot of goals. High scoring games are usually an absolute battle. I think any game involving Hull City this season, if you're a betting man or woman, both teams to score, you're nailed on all the time. But I think, it's really hard for me, this one, because there's a little bit of me that thinks we're going to win and be one of those games where it's like, oh my God, we're going to ruin everybody's accumulators kind of game. Yeah. But then I also look at Sunderland's quality and I look at our defensive shape and how many chances we give. And I'm thinking, can we keep Sunderland out? Well, to reduce the amount of goals they score to the point that we score more than them, and I don't think so. So I actually think it'll be a loss, but I think it'll be a close one. I think it'll be sort of like a 3-2 sort of thriller kind of game. So, but no, I'm going to go the same as you. I'm going to say 2-2 draw, because that way we're both sitting on the fence and it's a point. We'll take that. I'll certainly take that. I don't know about you.
I think I've had my last 2 predictions right. I'd prefer a win, but look, when you don't lose, it's always a positive. But and always good catching up, mate. I wish you no luck on Saturday, Sunday, whatever day it is. But I hope you have a nice rest of the season after that. Sans our game against each other in the return game.
Yeah, cheers for having me on, mate. Always a pleasure.